Hi there, I'm Judy Holland, and welcome to Happy Nest, the podcast where you can hear the latest research and best advice for living well when your kids leave home. Join me as I interview experts and explore how to reinvent yourself during this critical passage. I hope you'll head over to judyhollandauthor.com and check out my new book, Happy Nest, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. I'm here today on the Happy Nest podcast with Richard Slatcher, a psychologist at the University of Georgia. His research and teaching focuses on understanding effects of close relationships on health and well-being. He looks at intimacy, self-disclosure, and partner responsiveness. He also studies the links between close relationships, biology, and physical health. Richard's lab is researching the impact of smartphone use and social media engagement on relationships. He's also doing a huge global study called Love in the Time of COVID. I'm here today with Richard Slatcher. He's a psychologist at the University of Georgia, and his focus is on close relationships, which I think is completely fascinating and cool. Richard, I'm so glad that you could jump out of your busy studies and teaching to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
You bet. Let me jump right in, Richard. So I'm just going to bring us right to the current times here, and that's a slightly different interview than I would have done with you last month. Richard, how do we best help our loved ones, our partners, our kids, who are living in close quarters, in increased social isolation, and some of them in quarantine?
Well, it goes without saying what a difficult time in history and unique time in modern history that we're living in, where much of the world is socially isolated from one another. And so I think it is an important question to ask: how do we help those folks who are isolated? Because especially as we see this go on for weeks or maybe even months, I think there will be certain people who are much more vulnerable to the effects of isolation than others. For example, you have your family there. I have my family here. I think we're going to be fairly well protected in a way. I think we may, get a little bit stir crazy at times, but we have our loved ones around us. Not everybody is as fortunate. Some people live on their own, and a place like New York City that has a lot of people congregate and live there because it's exciting. And they can do all kinds of things socially at bars and restaurants, and all of that has shut down, right? So I think we're fortunate today to really be able to have ways to connect with people in ways that we couldn't have in, let's say, the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. So I think the most important thing is if you know close family, friends who do live on their own, to reach out to them. You're seeing so many people in the last 2 weeks that have set up Zoom calls, Zoom and Skype, and other kinds of video chat, happy hours with friends. And so I think just kind of reach out to those friends that are, maybe more socially isolated with a quick text, see how they're doing, and see if you can get a conversation going with them.
Absolutely. And actually, last night, if you look on my social media, on my Instagram, I put out night 2 with photos of a computer with another couple and my husband and I. And that's a little bit springing out of the conversations. I've done 2 happy hours in a row, and every night we're finding somebody in a different state, sometimes a former college friend or something, and we're doing a virtual happy hour, and we're laughing, and we're I should have bought stock in Zoom because I can't believe Zoom is still standing, because I think the whole world is on Zoom. But
that's great that you're doing that.
I love it, and I've been posting it on social media, and people love it because it's you can reconnect. This is an opportunity. I didn't really have time to do that before. Now there's a little more stillness. I don't have a commute,
I think you're right, and we can talk more about later on in our chat some of the research that we're doing about the COVID situation here. But one of the things that we're hearing anecdotally from some of the people that are talking to us about COVID is that ironically, for some people, and I think this is going to vary a lot, but some people, like you are implying, feel in some ways more socially connected. And I think that's quite surprising. But I think we really want to see how this is affecting people in different living situations, because it's possible that it may be affecting those who are living alone much differently, although it may not be,
Maybe that depends where you are, Richard, on the introvert extrovert scale as well.
I think it depends on that. I think it depends upon other factors beyond the control of people, like the dramatic economic impact of this. A lot of people are going to be unemployed, so they're not having probably as much fun, socially connecting with other people over Zoom. They're worried about where their next paycheck is going to come from.
Right.
Now, fortunately, the government seems to be doing something at least now to be able to help out those people. But I think we're going to see, unfortunately, as we do often with health and well-being, some real disparities between those who are better off and those who have less in terms of how this impacts them.
Right. No, absolutely. So maybe I will fast forward here. I know that you're about launching this new global research project, and you do some really cool research, because I've poached it in the past for my book, Happiness, Finding Fulfillment When the Kids Leave Home. And you've sent me the most amazing sources. I think I know all of your friends in in social psychology in the United States, because I've called them up and they're all in my book.
I'm glad to be a connector.
But what do you tell us briefly about your study? But Richard, what do you expect? I guess that's a hypothesis, although I'm really not very sciencey. What do you expect to find looking at close relationships? Is it too early for you to kind of give a rough idea of what you expect in times close relationships, or as you said, and I poached from you, love in the time of COVID?
Yeah. I think, as I alluded to in what I was saying a moment ago, I think we're going to see very different things happening depending upon people's living circumstances, both whether or not they live alone versus with other people, how introverted or extroverted they are, and what their economic situation is like.
How cramped you are, right? How cramped you are, how many people in your house.
All those kinds of things. Yeah, the size of your space, how many people you have in there. So I would hypothesize that there's an initial thing going on right now that I think it's quite novel to be able to be connecting with so many people via these video chat programs, and people are really having fun with it right now. What we don't know, and I'm not sure, it's more of a research question than a hypothesis, but I'm wondering what's going to happen in a few weeks or a couple of months when the novelty of that wears off.
Right.
Will people feel less socially connected? Will they start showing some signs of depression? I think that people will be buffered by their living arrangements if they have family around, with the caveat that I think if people had been struggling in their relationship going into this is not going to help. So I think that might be an issue for some couples. If they were having a lot of conflict, this is going to be potentially a stressor on top of that. Now, if I heard from one couple who said, so one of the spouses was working a ton before, and now that spouse is at home all the time. And that was kind of the stressor in their relationship. And now,
interesting,
this person told me things are better than ever. So I think it really does depend upon what the nature of the conflict is, if there has been conflict in the relationship. So that's a question that I have, depending upon what, with regard to couples specifically, depending upon what the relationship is like going into this, situation of COVID, love in the time of COVID, what happens to their relationship? And I think we're going to see very different things depending upon the state of the relationship going into it.
Right, absolutely. But also, I might argue, without any of your psychology background, that it kind of depends how you frame it, how you look at it. And I'm thinking about, I have 2 college students and 1 singer-songwriter from Nashville that have landed back here. And actually, there are 3 dogs in my house, too, from a Great Dane to an adopted sort of pit bull mix. And so there's a lot going on at my house. But I have found that a lot of the writing that I've done for my Happy Nest book and research I've done with experts with young adults, I've been finding ways to manage things, to not treat them like teenagers or middle schoolers, to sit down and have meetings and say, okay, we got a lot of jobs around here. We don't, and how do we split this up? So I'm finding, I think if we're mindful and we manage things right, we can enhance relationships, or certainly some relationships. And I'm finding that in my household that my kids have all kinds of talents I didn't even really know they had. So we're kind of parceling things out. I'm going to have 2 daughters plant a bunch of geraniums because I can't keep anything alive I've never been able to, and they seem to be able to do that in their in their habitats in normal life, right? So maybe we can steer this thing if we're really mindful and we use certain methods. What do you think?
I think absolutely people's coping styles and how resilient they are, what has been called grit, alternatively, before all these things are kind of related ideas. I think those are going to absolutely play a huge role in how people deal with the vast changes in people's lives that are happening right now. Like you, I tend to, when faced with a stressor, try to be solution-oriented about it, kind of problem-focused. For me, diving into this from a research perspective has really been beneficial for me to cope with this, because I've been probably busier than I have been in years for the last 12 days.
Yeah.
From a professional standpoint. And that has helped just to kind of pass the time in terms of, it'd be easy to be just stuck reading the newspaper and see all the new numbers coming out about how numbers of cases are increasing dramatically, but it's happening slowly enough that it's, every time you go online, well, you have a little new piece of information, but it's kind of, overload. I think by just diving into something, whether it's a work project or I've heard about, this is interesting. So my wife has been very nicely doing all the shopping for the house during this time in terms of food shopping. And she noticed that the store that she gets all of our stuff from is completely out of flour. Why? Because people are baking and doing baking projects more than ever.
I heard that on the news. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And so I think, that's a way to cope, right? And it's also a great way, by the way, to do fun things with family members, as a kind of a bonding thing. So I think, by sort of doing things that are fun, that are stimulating, that are engaging, I think that can make a big difference. And as you say, being mindful, I think that's always useful in relationships, particularly when it comes to being a good listener and paying attention to your spouse and things like that.
Mm-hmm. But absolutely diving into things that you love. I have the same thing, Richard. I suddenly have so many podcasts and radio things. I'm doing some TV tomorrow morning, and I have endless people like you that I want to interview now that so many things have changed. So my challenge is to moderate that, because I am in many ways very fortunate to have this very rare window of 3 young adults at home. and I can never even get them all three on vacation together. So I'm in kind of a staycation here,
Yeah.
with dogs jumping over the chairs. You can hear them earlier, and can't quiet them always. But I think that's I'm diving into something I love, which is writing and researching and talking to people like you whose knowledge is a lot deeper than mine. So then there's the whole kind of dopamine brain effect of novelty and learning. So I'm kind of excited. I keep learning new things, but I also don't want to dive into a hole of work, because I have an amazing opportunity. We all do, to enhance and develop relationships with, and let me bring it to young adults, in addition to our romantic partner. How do we, Richard, create more harmonious relationships in cramped quarters with our young adults who boomeranged back home in times of COVID? What do you think? I know you've got a couple of teens there.
Yeah. I would say, so one of the challenges that that young adults face, and this is particularly true of folks in their first couple of years, those that go to college and university, their first couple of years, they come home and they feel a lot different. They feel like true adults,
Right.
like they've been on their own for a while. But their parents and sometimes their older siblings, they still see them as kids, as teens. So I think really when you do have your young adults that are coming home and living with you, first make sure that you're really treating them with the respect that they deserve. As they're no longer the kids in your house that you are telling what to do. Of course, we're always going to be parenting, right? Parenting never ends, but the relationship changes, and I think really acknowledging that your kids are independent people. I've heard from some of my research assistants who are saying that they're struggling with that a bit, the autonomy. They had so much autonomy in school. Now that they're home, they feel like that's kind of gone away. So I think really respecting your kids' autonomy and trying to foster that while they're at home with you, really listening to them, not lecturing to them, being really accepting of them for who they are. Those kinds of things that we know lead to deep and close relationships, I think, are really going to benefit families. And I think also trying to keep conflict in check. For parents too, no matter how close they are with their kids, it's a major life change to have your kids come home and live back with you. It's really fun now to have your 3 kids with you. Let's see what it's like in 2 months, right? I mean,
Right.
it could be a lot different. So I think for everyone to be really understanding, but I think for us as parents to really set an example for that, to not, to try to keep your cool when your kids might be really irritated with you, to try to really model being able to, if there is a disagreement, to have a disagreement without it blowing up into a full-fledged fight. I think that's really important, and I think that's a lesson that we can learn from interdependent cultures, like a lot of Eastern Asian cultures, where they really put an emphasis on people in the larger family unit getting along, rather than we here. Eli Finkel has this great book that I'm sure you've read,
Yeah.
All or Nothing Marriage.
Got it.
That we're so focused on ourselves here and self-fulfillment in our relationships. And this isn't just, Eli looks at marriage, but this could be true of our relationships generally. I think looking at the better good of trying to sort of have relationships that go well in a household, I think that you'll be happier if you do that. I think it's sort of like taking the perspective, you're not fighting, you're not having an argument to teach the kid a lesson or to win the argument. You want, the goal should be to resolve the disagreement.
Right. And now with older kids, everybody has more skills likely to resolve conflict as we become a little more measured and we've had a little more experience. It's not as naturally combustible as it is when teens or like toddlers are going through the rapid brain development and are just likely likely to blow up just because there's so much going on in their brain.
Correct. That's exactly right.
So I see this also. I think, Richard, that's possible. This could be, an opportunity to rewrite some narratives from childhood. So I know I had one of my kids, my middle child, come home and complain that she was treated in a certain way. And we seem to have ironed that out, and now she looks at it differently, and so do we, because she's older and she can kind of reframe it. So this actually, in a positive way, I think we can, if we do this right, look at it as a way to rewrite some childhood narratives. They always say you can't go home again, and I still have some feelings that stick to me about my native Vermont. And I think there's a possibility that we can rewrite some of these, have good discussions, communication, make dinners together, and resolve some of these if we do this right.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think what we're going to see is that for those families that at their center really do have pretty good communication patterns to begin with, that you're going to see those families potentially really thrive in this situation.
Communications at a premium in cramped quarters, right?
It's really at a premium. And I think really being mindful of other people's feelings and really trying to be it's ironic that trying to be as selfless as possible perhaps brings the most benefits for the self, because by being selfless, that's going to be really good for your relationships. You're going to get along better, and in turn you're going to be happier.
Right. No, I think that's great. I also think, Richard, that, and tell me what I'm interested in your thoughts in, I think that this is because of all these huge changes. Eventually, we are coming out of this. This will be temporary. That I think we're going to see this boom of innovation in all kinds of different ways. I mean, people, I'm now realizing, I drove to see people all over the place, flew to California to do podcast interviews before, and now I realize, whoa, I can get 96% of the same connection if I do it right virtually. So I think we're going to see some changes in a bigger picture way, don't you?
Isn't it really interesting to think about that? I agree with you, and I've been wondering what those are going to be. I think a lot of them, as is the case with a lot of innovation, will be really hard to predict. I think we won't know until it's right on top of us that something will fundamentally change. To give a small example, I have these, as you know, I recently moved to Athens, Georgia.
Right.
And for 10 years, my wife and I were in Michigan, and I had these three good friends there who the four of us are really interested in indie music. So, actually, Athens, Georgia here is the home of REM, one of the great indie rock bands. And so we all had this bond over music and would go out and see music together a lot. And I've really felt a sense of loss about that being here in Athens, even though this is an amazing music town, just the loss of that friendship. Well, we're all cooped up in our houses now. And so we've actually reconnected over through texting, and we've had a couple of kind of video, talking, video chats and hanging out, having a couple of bourbons while listening to music. But this is changing potentially, like, for example, the way people listen to music. There's this new app that's come out, and I'm not going to say the name of it because it has a lot of bugs still, but the idea is great, to be able to listen to music together, all in different places, but actually to be able to listen to the same music and be able to basically have a playlist that each person, so my three friends in Michigan and I, we can be listening to some songs, and I can have a friend in Michigan add a song to our playlist that we're listening to together at the same time. I can add a song.
Cool.
And we can also communicate via this app and sort of hang out like we would have over the fire on a night in April in Michigan.
Wow.
One of the other things that I've seen that's related to this that also shows my interest in music is you've probably have seen some of these musicians who are now having concerts from their homes.
Yes.
This is like a totally new thing, and now like everybody seems to be doing it. I saw the first one I saw was Indigo Girls a couple of weeks ago, and I was so moved when I saw them performing in, I guess it was one of their houses, 6 feet apart, of course. And I thought, wow, this is something, I looked at, it was on Facebook that they were doing the show. And I said, and I looked and I saw that there were 50,000 people that were watching this, and we were all experiencing this at the same time, which led to this sort of a unique moment, something I'd never had that experience before. I'd done Skype and Zoom calls before, but this was something new. So it was innovative in how we connect. So I wouldn't have predicted something like that.
Right. So we're talking right now about some really cool innovations, some positive effects of technology. But let me bring me back to my discussions I had with you about when you and your wife were in Europe, in Switzerland, I think, talking about taking walks together.
Yep.
That's a really good topic. You and I talked for my book about
Of course.
couples and about walks, and there's a nice segment in my book about you and your wife walking. And you talked
nice.
about taking social media about only bringing. I always remember this: only bringing the cell phone as a navigational tool. Let's talk about this. How can social media and smartphone use hurt relationships, especially at the dinner table, in close quarters? Help me with that, because I know that you've been really interested in that, and I'm very interested in that too.
Yeah, I think it's just, the main idea is just to set limits on how you're using your devices when you are in a setting that you're really meant to be talking with others face to face. So when you're at the dinner table, when you're taking a walk with your spouse or your kids or your friends. It's interesting that since we first talked about this, a few years ago, I don't have data, so this is anecdotal. But what I've noticed is that I think the norms around the use of smartphones seem to be changing for the better somewhat. Whereas I noticed so much early on when people had phones, and they were so novel, smartphones, that you saw a lot of what we call technoference, interference of the in-person conversations by the phone. I feel like I believe that I've noticed this less. It would be data that you'd want to collect to ascertain that for certain. But so I think norms are changing a little bit. I think people are realizing that it's really rude to be, if you're at the dinner table, to be checking your phone. I see that less. But I think, especially if you're in this situation where you have, if it's a new situation where maybe you were an empty nester and your kids are back living with you at home, to having an open and frank conversation with them about how this should go. Like, look, we're living together. I think, what do you think about having phone-free meals or times that we can really hang out together and not have the phone? And you want to get buy-in from people. You don't want to just kind of throw this at somebody like it's your edict. I think it's really important to do that and try to find ways to interact that are more interesting than using the phone. An example would be like a fun board game. Like my boys are always clamoring for us to play Risk. And so when we're doing that, they're not thinking about being on their phone. They're into the game. And so finding ways, we're competing against this very interesting diversion, our phones, when we're with other people, right?
Yeah.
So, and I guess as the person who's using the device, my advice would be, with when someone makes a bid for your attention, when they're trying to talk to you, just put the phone down. That's the easiest thing you can do. And until that conversation's over, don't even think about looking at it. Even though maybe you're in some article, or you're reading some article and really into it, if your partner, or your kid, or your roommate wants to talk to you, that's a moment for connection. And we don't want to lose those, because I hypothesize, and we talk about this. I don't know if we had this paper that came out in an academic journal where we talk about this. It's the paper was smartphones and relationships, an evolutionary mismatch ? Where we basically hypothesize that our technology and our smartphones in particular, they really do have the power to bring us together. But there is something unique about that face-to-face human connection.
Right.
And so this is what's fascinating about this time, with as difficult as this time is. What's fascinating about it is that we have this natural experiment to be able to see what are the effects of relying exclusively, if you're fortunate enough to have internet and ways to communicate with people through technology. What are the ramifications of using only that to communicate with people?
Right. And Richard, before I forget this part, as we're slowly starting to wrap up, how did people, how can people dial in and participate in this global study you're doing, The Love in the Times of COVID? Is there a really easy way that we can tap in?
I can tell you the website is loveinthetimeofcovid.me.
Oh, it's all about me, right?
Exactly.
There's a wonderful...
We thought that was an appropriate extension.
That's wonderful. You know, that is a wonderful... I have a singer-songwriter in Nashville, and I heard the man that wrote... There's a song that's all about me, everything about me. It's a beautiful song, and he sang it for a big country star, but he wrote it for a big country star, but I heard him sing it, and I thought... And I stopped at this little Nashville bar afterward, and I said, where did you get that idea? And he said, well, it was a girlfriend of mine. And he you know, a lot of it was very autobiographical, but that's good. Richard, why are we so... Let me just tie... The cell phone thing still is in my craw here. Why do we get so... I'm one that's just outraged when my husband continues on the phone while it's the hospital, I'm talking to somebody, you know. I'm outraged by it. What is it psychologically? Are we feeling rejected? Gee, do you think your friend in California is more important than me? Do you think that hospital message really has to be handled now in the middle of my sentence? What is so outraging and divisive and destructive to close relationships when it comes to phones interrupting interaction?
I think it's that, so two things. One is that phones are ubiquitous. We can carry them with us wherever we go. So it's something that happens a lot, these sorts of interruptions, where, you know, before that, you might occasionally bring a book with you to a cafe or something like that, but there weren't many things you'd carry with you that would be that distracting.
Yeah.
And number two, when you're on your phone, it's different than, and we have some data that suggests this, it's a little bit different than, say, just reading a book or a newspaper article. Because if I'm at a happy hour or something like that, and I'm telling a story, and I see somebody pull out their phone and start checking it, your mind immediately goes to, well, that phone is more interesting than I am.
Right.
And so that really, we all want to be validated. We all want to be people to like us and to respect us, and that immediately is a signal that they don't.
Yep. It's an insult.
So
it's an insult.
It's insulting. It's a very powerful evolutionary mechanism that's primed. I mean, it was useful throughout evolutionary history to be responded to, going all the way back in terms of human to the mother-child bond. Children would literally not survive without the responsiveness of the mother. So we crave being responded to, and responding in this case, I mean, just really being paid attention to.
Right.
So I think, and then on top of that, it's often when people are, if you're in a conversation, they keep going to their phone, it's usually that they're probably maybe responding to some sort of a text message from somebody. So they're actually, not only are they more interested in something else, they're more interested in somebody else.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of adds insult to injury, right?
Right. No, that's I think that's the way I feel. Thank you for articulating that.
Exactly. Let me validate you. That is a natural human reaction. What that says about you, Judy, is that you're a person.
Validate, is that a psychology term of art, to be validated? I feel validated.
Yes,
I feel okay. Good. I didn't know it was a term, but I feel like that word is fitting the way I'm feeling right now, Richard. Good. Okay, let's do our kicker.
Exactly.
In journalism, we do raps and kickers, and this is a kicker here. I want to go out on the most positive note that we can with regard to this break in the busyness of life. What, Richard, do you see with regard to close relationships? What are the benefits that can spring out of this unexpected, sudden Twilight Zone-like break in the busyness of life?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I think two things come to mind. One, that maybe we'll reconnect with people who we lost connection with or maybe had a bit of a falling out with. I've already heard some stories about people now in this time. Maybe they're concerned about parents who, because obviously older people are more susceptible to the effects of COVID-19, that they're reestablishing relationships. I've already heard stories about that. So that would be great if somehow this leads to the repairing of relationships. And the other thing that you just said is slowing down. So, my kids, have been involved in so many things at school, in some ways overscheduled for so long. My older son did travel soccer for about a decade. I know your son.
That's a nightmare.
I'm sure that he played travel lacrosse for longer than that, and so
you don't have weekends, right? I've never had a weekend in my life. I have three kids. I got three athletes.
Well, now a lot of us, and again, things are going to be very different for people of different socioeconomic means, right? I think we're going to see very different things happening. But I think for those people who are overscheduled, who do have kids involved in a million things, or maybe themselves are involved in a million things, I think this is going to be a kind of pause button on that. I think part of the reason why some people are reporting feeling better is they've just slowed down. I always give, in one of my last lectures, the last lecture that I gave in my intro psych class to about 400 students every year, we talk about happiness and what leads to happiness. And one of the things that I always suggest to them is simplify and slow down. Yeah. We're always so busy. And I think by doing that, we're in some ways given this opportunity during this crisis, forced upon us to really cut back. Yep. And I think that could lead to greater happiness, well-being, and improved social relationships because we now have more time to focus on them.
Wonderful. Richard, thank you so much. I'm here today signing off with Richard Slatcher, a psychologist at the University of Georgia who is an expert on close relationships. Richard, thank you so much for being with us today, and I'm going to be back at you, and I'm very interested to see the results of your study. Those studies take a long time, right? But I'll be very interested.
They do, although we're getting results quickly. We already have about 1,000 people in the study. So,
well, and remind people again, how do they sign up to explain quickly in a nutshell what's your study and how do they get into that again?
Sure. So the name of the website, the name of the study is loveinthetimeofcovid.me. That's the website. And the study is a study looking at the effects of the pandemic on people's relationships and more generally their well-being, kind of the psychological factors that are being impacted by our current situation. And we're going to be, the initial survey is about a 20-minute questionnaire that includes in that an open-ended response that people seem to really find interesting, where they can share their thoughts about how this is impacting them. And then after that, we're going to have shorter surveys once every 2 weeks where we're going to follow up people just to see how they're doing and seeing how things are changing for people over the course of this whole thing.
Perfect, Richard. I'll sign right up and do that. Me, I'm an open book, so I'm happy to do that.
Wonderful. And everything's anonymous, so even if you're not an open book, please come and take part in our study.
Perfect. Okay, thanks so much. Signing off, and I'll be back in touch with you.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning into my Happiness Podcast, where we explore how to get the best out of the empty nest. I hope you'll subscribe, write a review, and reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out my website, judyhollandauthor.com. Have a great day, and remember, make it happen.